Welcome to this presentation about the divergence of ESG ratings. Here is the table of contents of the presentation. After presenting you a brief summary of what this paper is, we will present you the empirical framework and the main findings of the paper. We will then explain the methodology by axis of divergence and finish these presentations by presenting you the main limitations and the solutions to improve the use of ESG ratings. Let's begin by the summary. In this paper, the authors aim to compare 6 ESG rating agencies and explain the divergence between their ratings. To do so, they created a taxonomy that decomposed the divergence into 3 parameters: scope, measurement, and weight.
Now let's talk about the empirical framework. Since the late 20th century until today, sustainable investments have grown in popularity and have become an increasingly important topic for investors. A new trend has emerged. Investors no longer base their decisions solely on a company's financial performance, they also consider the company's practice. This is how the ESG, environment, social, and governance criteria emerge. These criteria are based on 3 pillars: or environmental, for an example considering greenhouse gas emission, waste management, and energy; social, relating to working conditions and human rights; and governance, how the company is managed. To help investors evaluate these criteria and make informed decisions, specialized rating agencies for ESG criteria have emerged. These agencies analyze and rate companies based on their environmental, social, and governance practices, providing investors with essential information regarding these ESG criteria for their investment choices. Many agencies have thus emerged to meet investors' needs. However, studies have also revealed discrepancies in the rating given by different ESG rating companies, which are important in the financial sector. These discrepancies create uncertainty among companies and investors. For example, for companies, this can lead to hitting the target but missing the points effects, where they optimize their score with one agency without significantly improving their overall ESG performance. More generally, this divergence also strongly impacts the prices of financial assets because they struggle to correctly integrate companies' ESG performance. To understand this divergence, the authors conduct a comparative analysis of ESG ratings provided by 6 major agencies: KLD, Sustainalytics, Moody's, S&P Global, Refinitiv, and MSCI. These agencies were selected for their market relevance, being recognized and widely used by sustainable finance professionals worldwide. However, the authors quickly faced a major challenge: accurately quantifying these divergences. This difficulty mainly lies in the heterogeneity of the methodologies used by the agencies, each using different indicators and criteria to assess similar aspects of ESG performance, making comparison of the results particularly complex. To analyze this divergence, the authors adopted a methodology based on 3 main steps that we will discuss. The first step to compare the indicators was to better organize the data to allow for comparison. The authors decided to create their own ranking method using a bottom-up approach. This involved collecting 709 indicators from 6 ESG rating agencies and adding a detailed description. These indicators were then grouped into categories. They grouped all indicators from each agency describing an identical attribute into the same category. For example, several attributes related to water were grouped in the same category. To create these categories, the authors follow two strict rules. First, each indicator can only belong to one category, and secondly, a category is created only if at least two similar indicators are identified in the data from two different agencies. The initial 709 indicators were thus grouped into a list of 64 categories. Finally, a robustness test was conducted to validate their methodology. This test confirmed that the groupings were reliable and applicable to a wide range of cases. After laying the groundwork with the first step, the authors began the comparative analysis using the defined categories. To measure these divergences, the authors first assigned category scores to each group of indicators created during the first step, for both companies and rating agencies. These scores were obtained by averaging the values of the indicators assigned to each category. These category scores represent how a ESG category is evaluated by each rating agency. They provide a common basis for comparing methodologies, highlighting the specific choices made by each agency in selecting and using indicators. Regarding the third and final step of their methodology, the authors used the category scores as a basis to estimate the weights assigned to each category in the calculation of overall ratings. This would help to understand if the different rating companies disagree about the importance of each attribute by identifying the attributes to which they assign significantly different weights. To do this, they wanted to estimate an econometric model that calculates the overall rating R of a company F for each rater K. Their model is thus a linear relationship between the overall rating CFKG, which is the category score assigned to the company F by the rating agency K for the category G. This category score is multiplied by the weight assigned by the rating agency to that category. This is represented by the letter W. The authors estimated this model using ordinary least squares regression. After making adjustments, they decided to apply a constraint. Wave coefficients cannot be negative. This suggests that no category can contribute negatively to the overall rating, which is consistent with the idea that positive ESG performance in a category can only improve the overall evaluation of a company. Once the regressions was complete, they focus on the R-squared of the model, which measure to what extent the variance of overall ratings can be explained by category scores. The results obtained range from 0.79 to 0.99, indicating that their model could reproduce the original ratings with high accuracy. Finally, they analyzed the coefficients to verify their significance and impact on each category to determine the categories with the most significant differences. After exploring the methodology and the reason behind the study, we can now focus on the main findings. This research highlighted three major contributions. Firstly, how their created methodology provides additional information on understanding rating divergences. Secondly, they identified the three main reasons: scope, measurement, and wave. Lastly, this rating difference is caused by a rater effect that we will cover. The first result of this research is the method that the authors developed. Even though it is not exactly a result, it is an important finding for understanding ESG ratings. The authors are the first to study the method of major ESG rating agencies in a clear and detailed way. This method now makes it possible to, firstly, make different methods easier to compare. As mentioned earlier, rating agencies use different indicators and measure different things, which made the comparison difficult. This taxonomy has proven effective as the researchers were able to create an aggregation rule with an accuracy ranging from 79% to 99%, demonstrating that it can efficiently organize data with initially incompatible structures. Secondly, understand why ratings are different by looking at what agencies measure and how they give importance to each part. This method explains why ESG ratings vary from one agency to another. This method is an important step forward and could help future studies compare ratings and look deeper into ESG criteria. Thanks to their work, the authors were able to understand the different reasons for these rating divergences between agencies. They were divided into three types of divergences, each relating to a stage of the methodology: scope, measurement, and wave. The first divergence was found following the first part of the methodology, which involved organizing the indicators into categories. This scope explained 38% of the divergences between ratings. It highlights that ESG rating agencies do not always evaluate the same attributes. For example, some might consider ocean pollution while others might not. The measurement represents divergences in the indicators used to evaluate the same attribute. These differences explain 56% of the observed gaps between ESG ratings. It focuses on divergences in the indicators that agencies use to evaluate the same attribute. For example, even if two agencies evaluate the same category, like greenhouse gas emissions, they might use different methods or metric. Example, Moody's might consider the total amount of CO2 emitted in a year, while KLD might use carbon intensity. The waves represent divergences in the importance given to different categories of indicators when aggregating ESG scores. These differences explain 6% of the observed gaps between ratings. This means that even if two agencies evaluate the same indicator with the same data, they can still arrive at different ESG scores because they use different weightings. For instance, one agency might place more importance on governance practice than environmental criteria, while it could be the opposite for another. We can conclude from this data that the measurement and thus that the same attribute being measured using different indicators is the main reason for this rating divergence. The last finding that the authors discovered is the Rater effect, also known as the halo effect. This bias occurs when a rating agency, having a generally positive or negative perception of a company, assigns scores consistent with this perception across all evaluated categories, regardless of the company's actual performance in each specific area. So, for example, if a company receives a good rating in the water category, it is likely to receive better rating in its other categories and vice versa. This poses a problem because it highlights that rating agencies are not entirely objective in their ratings and can be influenced by our general perception. The authors quantify this effect in their work and showed that it accounts for approximately 15% of the variation in the ratings. Now Louis will talk about the limitations.
First one is about the problem with the data. The data comes from ESG rating providers. But we can't ensure the data hasn't been modified to some ends. As a consequence, data could be biased. So, there is a clear impact on the quality of the results. Second problem is linked to the potential conflicts of interest. On the one hand, firms want a good ESG rating to show that they are becoming more and more sustainable. On the other hand, investors want an unbiased rating to be sure that they invest in a firm which is really sustainable. As a consequence, there is a clear incentive for ESG raters to bias their rating. Let's move to the sixth part of the presentation, which is about towards a sustainable socio-economic system. Or, in other words, how could we improve the use of ESG ratings? First solution is about the data. Researchers could use raw data because raw data can be independently verified, which ensures a high quality data. If raw data isn't available, researchers could collect it by themselves. And, of course, if possible, researchers should share their datasets in order to available them to other researchers. Second solution is about the ESG raters. Firstly, ESG raters should think about the causes of rater effect, discussed before during the presentation. Secondly, they should be more transparent about both their definition of ESG performance and their measurement practices, which are the two main reasons of divergence between ESG ratings. Third solution is about the role of regulators, which is creating communal resources. Regulators can act in different ways by creating a common taxonomy for ESG ratings, creating a dataset available for firms, ESG raters, researchers, etc. Firms can also play a role in the use of ESG ratings, because firms should agree with ESG raters on the goals they want to follow. It will permit to agree on the metrics to measure and that their improvements are reflecting in their rating. Now let's conclude these presentations. In this paper, the authors created a common taxonomy to compare ESG ratings. They identified three main reasons of divergence: measurement, which is the most important, scope, and weight, and also the presence of a rater effect. To counter this divergence, the authors call for a better transparency from ESG raters, a communal dataset, and an agreement between firms and ESG raters on what metrics to measure. Thank you for listening.